Let's get started. Thanks for coming, y'all. Today we are going to continue along with coding, and I can kind of just start off by orienting us to the calendar. So, this week's over. And we are here on week 14, Thursday. So today, as promised, we're going to discuss code that will help you interact with your code sketches a little bit more. Today, pretty much 100% of today is going to be spent reinforcing things that we've already done because we have to have code to interact with. So we'll be, maybe making a for loop here or there. But primarily, we're going to be talking about interacting with the mouse and the keyboard with, sketch objects. So as we kind of jump into that, I just want to point out to you that I will put up the code that we work with today, but there's a set of examples based around what we're talking about today. And there are 3 examples. We're mostly talking about these. So I can't promise that I'll get through like every little bit of these during class today. So if you're interested in kind of seeing an expanded version of what these would look like, these are sort of the finished versions. And then we will get just as far as we can today. So I'll be posting whatever code we work on today, as I usually do. So there's also a couple of advanced examples there if you're of that persuasion. Just a reminder that Tuesday is our last day of class. What's that again? Tuesday is our last day of class. So after that, I will be posting a final review. My guess is that I will get that final review done by Wednesday or Thursday. Hopefully pretty soon. I might even be able to get it done. Wednesday is a good bet because I have other classes on Tuesday. So I probably won't be able to sit down and do it at that time. But expect a video final review sometime in between our last class and the final. Hopefully in plenty of time for the final. And then, of course, during finals week, please don't forget that our final exam is on the 22nd. Also, please don't forget that the last day to turn anything in to anyone, including me, is the 16th. So probably going to say that again on Tuesday just to make sure everybody knows what's up there. So let's jump into interaction issues. Before we do, I'm happy to entertain questions. All right. Also, just a brief reminder that on Tuesday the 13th, we're going to be having a little bit of flexible time during class. Like I have plenty of things that I can talk about, but if you have questions or there are sort of things that you want to know about P5 that I haven't talked about, which is like there's a ton of stuff that I haven't talked about. If there's any of that stuff that you want to know, please feel free to ask me during class or email me in advance, and I'll take some time to prep up for your questions. So let's jump into some of these interaction and interface basics. So I'm going to start sort of thinking about just basic mouse interaction. And I have a new sort of P5 editor open. And I'm just going to review like one of the main ways that we've been able to interact with our sketches up to this point has been by using mouse X and mouse Y. And as you may have guessed, that corresponds to the X and Y coordinate of the cursor, the mouse cursor. So that basically gets us the ability to do this, right? So that's something that we've done kind of like on the first day of thinking about code. And as you know, we've used that technique in a couple of sketches. So this is sort of like just want to mention it as like one way that we've already talked about that sort of talks about interaction. There are a bunch of other sort of interaction functions in P5. So I'm just going to pull up the reference for a second. And I want to show you in the reference where most of these functions are. So they're somewhere around here. Here we go. So if you look at the events section of the reference, all of the interaction functions are basically like in here. And we're going to look at sort of, you can see mouse X and mouse Y are already in here. We're going to look at a couple of these today. Just kind of a laundry list of things that we will try to look at today. We're going to try to look at the mouse clicked function. We're going to also look at the key pressed function and key code. So that's what I can almost like guarantee that we'll get through today. All of these are exciting functions. If you're looking for sort of a more edited list, I would definitely also point you to the slides. So the slides have kind of a more sort of curated list of the functions that I just showed you that are maybe like a little bit more sort of curated. So it's a shorter list. And it's a shorter list because I sort of just decided those are the ones that I actually use and that I think are probably the most common and most important. So probably if you're looking for like kind of a curated list of ways to interact with stuff, like these two slides would be your go-to. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into something here. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a variable for this. And I'm going to set up a variable for the color. And I'm just going to call it, I'm going to give it a grayscale value, so I'm just going to use one number. I'm going to start it at 0, which, as we all know, is black. And then let's say I'll take this fill function. Is everybody okay with the type size on the screen? It looks like it's gotten a little smaller. Okay, yeah, I'll take care of that. Thanks. Well, can always do it the easy way. Usually there's a preferences thing up here, but oh, it's over here, sorry. You can set the preferences up here for your type scale, but you can also, to a certain extent, you can just zoom in on the browser. This looks better to me, doesn't it? Yeah. All right, so we're going to fill that with C in this case. And let me run the code. So we've got our black color here. And I'm just going to show you really quickly how the mouse clicked function works. So let's go ahead and say mouse clicked. And then I'm going to open up curly brackets. And how about I set C to 255? So that should be pretty straightforward. One thing that I forgot, because I code in a bunch of different languages, I forgot to write the word function here. That's a P5 specific thing. And you can see now when I go ahead and click the mouse, I'm changing the color, right? So this function basically activates whatever statements are inside of it, okay? So this is like kind of the super simple way to do it. Now, I hear what you're saying already, which is, what if I want to change it back? Oh, well, if you want to change it back to a different color, then we have to start thinking about maybe some logic, right? So probably the most straightforward way to change it back to the original color, or to, assign any variable to, its original value, right, would be to use some if statements. So here we could say something like mouse clicked if C equals And I'm using the double equals sign because it's an evaluative operator inside an if statement. So if C equals 0, then I'll change it to C equals 255. And maybe if, I could also use else here, but I'm just going to be explicit about it. If C equals 255, then I can change it to 0. C equals 0. So this should basically give us the ability to kind of toggle that color back and forth. Okay? So let me give it a shot. So here's C equals 0, and we're clicking. And obviously something's wrong with my logic. So if C equals 0, then C equals 255. So probably, let me just try, I'm going to comment this part out and just go ahead and kind of debug my way out of this. So I'm going to print the value of C here. And let's see what happens. Okay, so that basically, it looks like probably what happened is my if statements are fighting with each other. So probably what I would want here in this case is actually an else if. So in other words, I think what is happening is that C equals 255. If it equals 0, then C is assigned to equal 255. And then here, if C is equal to 255, which we just made it 255, right? Then it's switching back to 0. So it's basically switching to 0 like in a less time than we can see it change. So because of that, using the else if operator only gets triggered if C is not equal to 0 in the beginning of the click. So let's give that a shot. And as promised, now we have our kind of perfect toggling. So if statements can be kind of funny. I mean, I always get a little bit hung up on logic. It's just one of those things. And definitely troubleshooting it through the console is almost always the best way to go if you get confused. And let's see, so now we've got our kind of toggling thing happening. What if we want to, what if we want to come up with a system where if you click it, every time you click it, the color changes by a certain amount? So it's like you're basically piling up the clicks progressively. That's a way to do it. Let's try that. I'm going to go ahead and comment out this toggly bit. And I think I'm going to set up a variable here called, I'm going to set up another variable called count. There are lots of different ways of setting up this type of a variable, but we'll just start there with 0. And let's go ahead and iterate count down here. So, and then after I add to the value of count, I'm also going to print it to the console, just so y'all can see. Okay, so, So I'm still black here. There's my first click, there's my second click, third, fourth, et cetera, et cetera. So what this is doing is that every time the mouse clicked function is called, it's adding 1 to the value of count. Okay? So it's pretty straightforward. Now, what can we actually do with that value? Well, if we wanted to, we could probably scale the color. So let's take C, which right now is sort of our color variable, and let's say C, let's say C plus equals count times 10. Or you could give it just some arbitrary number, too. In fact, you could just say C plus equals 10. Let's do that. That's a little simpler. And so what that is going to give me is that when I click now, you can see it's progressively getting brighter, right? So what happens, though, is that at some point I do sort of like hit the wall, right? So that sort of puts us in the same situation as we were in last week with our bouncing ball, right? And you could actually use the exact same code to make it click and go back in the other direction towards darkness, right? Because you would just be subtracting the value. So I think that's in the examples. I'm not going to go into that like in great detail. I'm just trying to kind of show you what you can do with mouse clicking. We're only going to spend a couple of minutes on mouse clicking. Now, some of you might be asking, hey, Meg, like you're using this mouse clicked function, but in the slides, there are all of these other mouse functions that you can use. I would say, yes. It's true, there are many mouse functions. These probably 4 or 5 functions, mouse released, mouse pressed, mouse moved, mouse dragged, those could all be considered a click, or they could be part of a click. So if you've never done UI UX stuff before, a click, like an actual mouse click, has 4 or 5 parts, depending on what language you're using. So in other words, there's the press, there's the movement when it's pressed, there's the release, which is when you prick your finger up, you know. And so those are all specific moments in the click that you can reference. But the reason that I use mouse click is because it's easy, and that's what most people want. Right? So most people are just thinking of a click. But it is worth maybe reflecting on how you interact with your normal computer in that if I click on this, this got activated during the press, right? Like all I had to do was press. But if I want to, you know, drag, I have to press and drag. So if you kind of like want a certain type of interaction, I would really like think about it and think about how you actually interact with the mouse if you want some of those more specific functions. It's also worth noting that in a lot of functions on Mac and Windows, it actually doesn't do what you want it to do until you release it. So like here, I can kind of move this all over the place, and it doesn't sort of follow through on it until I release the mouse. So those functions are actually written not for mouse pressed or for mouse clicked, they're written for the release. So just something to think about. All of those functions that I just mentioned, they work exactly the same way as mouse clicked, they're just targeting a different action, okay? So there we have mousiness. And I think we can probably, you know, as I said, like, there's a much more sort of thorough example that I put together, but you know these are just sort of some techniques that I'm sort of demonstrating in real time. So thinking about like keyboard interaction, I think that's probably the next thing that we should think about. So so with keyboard interaction, there is a keypressed function. Which again, I'm showing you the keypress function, even though there are lots of other ways to do key interaction, because the keypress tends to be the most common and the most ubiquitous. Yes? Yes. Yes. So that's actually in the advanced example for rollover in the set of examples for today. And yeah, that's basically like you use a series of if statements to say it's between X on this level and between Y, and if the mouse is in that part of the screen, it'll do something. Yeah, that's a super way of using mouse interaction. So let's go ahead and stick a keyboard function in here. And I'm going to use keypressed. Now, keypressed by itself is going to test for if any key has been pressed. It'll return either true or false. So that's sort of useful, but I kind of want to maybe like skip ahead a tiny bit. So basically what you get if you just activate the keypressed function is it functions like if you started up a game and it says press any key to begin, right? It's that type of an interaction. I think for our purposes, it would be better for us to actually reference specific keys. To that end, I think I'm going to go ahead and go for a couple of different ways of doing it. So first, I'm going to use the, within an if statement, I'm going to use the key variable. And key is a system variable that will basically reference certain keys. So I'm going to use like a letter key on my keyboard here. So I'll use the M. Is that what I want to do? Hang on, let me think about it. I think I'll use the M variable. And because I'm actually not using like a variable called M, I'm actually using the letter M, I have to put it in single quotes. And so I can kind of go from here. There's more that I will do, but we're going to start here. So if key equals lowercase m, maybe in this case, just to keep it simple, I will shift C to, let's see, C starts off being 0, and then we commented out all the other stuff. So I can probably put C at like 255. And that should be a proof of concept here. OK, so there's my thing. If I hit the little M key, let me take a look at my examples here. Nope, that's completely fine. So I'm a little bit curious here, just going to check out what's happening here. So it looks like my fill is there. I don't think I've clicked the mouse. So my biggest question right now, just kind of troubleshooting this, is like, do I have a typo, or did I type something wrong? So I'm going to print to the console, which is sort of the, the way to troubleshoot. And I'm really mostly curious if the key press is registering, and it looks like it's not. So I'm just going to run back to the keypressed reference for a second here and make sure that I don't have some kind of weird syntax error. So, should be fine. Look at my previous example. Interesting. Oh, no? Let me try just another key, just for... Aha. OK, so that was actually me just being completely stupid. And let me tell you something that about interaction in P5. And this is like for real. So basically what I was doing is I kind of came over here, and I was like interacting with the window by moving the thing around. And I was saying to myself, like, OK, like, why isn't it registering a keyboard press, right? So fun fact, in P5, in a web browser, this is specific to the web browser, you actually have to click once to activate the window and make it listen for other things. So that is a thing, and I totally forgot about that. So yeah, so definitely be sure that you click at least once. Now, by clicking once, we're sort of also like overwriting what we've already done because we're activating this little code here. So I'm just going to comment this out because it's kind of fighting with what we just did. And then if I hit the C key, you can see that it's basically like asking me, yes, it's true. And then apparently, this is funny, I forgot to put quotes on my message to the console. So apparently, P5 doesn't like the word yay. So And I keep, for some reason, like brain's not working right quite awesomely today. I keep wanting to click this and make something happen, but I have to hit the keyboard because that's what we've written here. So as you can see, this is working just fine. It's me. So yeah, so moving along, like when you're using key presses in P5, it's sort of a convention in coding when you're using the keyboard to capture multiple states of keys. So I'm going to go ahead and make this into a compound logic statement by using the OR operator. And then I'm going to add a key press of a single letter, so it's a single quote for capital C. Does anybody have like a good sort of idea for why I might do that? It's a very time-honored convention in computing. Yes? Right, because a lot of times when people go to interact with stuff, they don't realize that they have their caps lock on. So it's one of those things to like be polite to your user. You know, you just give them that extra option. So yeah, basically at this point, I should be able to, if I play the sketch again, I should be able to hit the C here, and then if I just play it again, I should be able to use the uppercase C. And definitely, don't forget you do have to click to sort of open up the sketch for interaction. One of the reasons why you may have noticed in like web apps, it's commonly a convention to, when you get on like the first screen of a web-based game or something, it always says click to begin or click to activate. That's because in your web browser, you're basically working with JavaScript, and your web browser doesn't really understand that the window that has the sketch in it is like the primary window that you want to interact with. And by clicking, you're basically telling your web browser, like, that's where I am and that's what I'm doing, so you should listen for events. So that's kind of one of those things that's like specific to coding on the web. That's just kind of a convention. And I've looked at, there are certain ways of getting around that if you get into advanced coding, like you can kind of automatically activate it with other things like time or potentially like others, like sensor input if you're on an iPad or something like that. But for the most part, you're kind of stuck with that, having to activate the window with some sort of a click. So in any case, there is this sort of key pressed window. In order to kind of like show you the next thing, I'm going to go ahead and put the ellipse at the middle of the screen, which is width divided by 2, height divided by 2. So this should draw our little ellipse at the middle of the screen. And within these keypressed functions, I think I'm going to just grab one of these to get me started. So I'm going to add a different type of key. And pretty much this key function that we just used for the uppercase and lowercase c, this key function will work with any one of the letter or number keys on your keyboard. Yeah? That's a good question. There's a key released method that you could use. So let me take a look at that after I kind of, we can definitely take a look at that after I explain what I'm doing. But basically, you would use the key released method in almost the exact same way that we use the key pressed method. You would just kind of attach it like in addition to. So yeah, we can totally do that. I just want to kind of like move through this. So we'll get through some of this like other stuff, and then we'll add a key released function. Great question. So yeah, so basically, I have it set up right now to use the up arrow. So the up arrow, all the space bar, the command, control, option, shift, delete, tab, those are all called special keys or special characters, and they have to be addressed in a slightly different way. So you basically would, for all of those keys, you would need to use the key code variable. And that's what we're doing in this if statement. I'm asking if key code, and then it's this triple is equal to up arrow, then we do some stuff, okay? So probably the first thing that I would like to do is go ahead and set it up so that the ellipse is kind of accepting an X and Y value. So right now, the ellipse is pretty much like hard-coded, like everything in here is just like a number, right? And there's no way for me to kind of change around the X and Y. So I'm gonna go ahead and just make a variable for X, and I think I'll make it 0 here, and then I'll come in here and I will make X equal to width divided by 2. Now, does anyone want to take a stab at why I decided to assign the value of X width divided by 2 down here and not up here? Because it's kind of important. Well, so I can tell you, if I were to just assign width divided by 2 up here, it is going to give me an error for sure. And the reason that it would give me an error is because you're basically asking it to use width, and width has not been set yet, because width is set in that create canvas function. So we kind of have to wait for the create canvas function in order to access the value of width or height. Fun fact. So I'll go ahead and kind of get that going here. So X equals width divided by 2, and then here I also have Y equals 0, and Y equals height divided by 2. And then, let's see, in here I can just say X and Y. Okay, so that's a whole lot of nothing right now. It's just a black circle in the middle of the screen. Okay, so hopefully we're all cool with that. So if I come back down here to my Keypressed function, it looks like I have a little variable in here for color, and then there's also the sort of Y variable. So basically right now, as this stands, if I activate this sketch, I should be able to reset the color to 255, because that code is still in play. And I also should be able to move the ellipse up, like raise it up on the Y, by hitting the up arrow. So, or down. But by the way, don't forget you have to activate the window. That gets me every time. So it seems like I have some sort of like a syntax error, and that's just this little line that's printing to the console. So I'll comment that out, and that should take care of that. So again, activate the window, and we're going down, which makes sense because numbers get larger, you know, the further from 0 they are. But yeah, we could also sort of like now add a sort of two-way kind of thing. So we could certainly test for the down arrow and just do the opposite. So here we can subtract 10. Activate the window, and now we're in there. Yeah, sound effects are critical when you're doing this kind of stuff. So let's see, and then of course we can also do it for the left and the right arrow, and in this case we would want to change the value of X, right? So let's go ahead and set that up. So here we have right and left and X and X. Excuse me. Okay, so let me activate this window, and we should have full steering. Except for one thing. We're leaning to the left a little, because I forgot to make this positive. Okay, so now we're all good here. Activate the window, and now we should be able to have kind of full steering capabilities. That is fun. So, student who asked a question about key released, what do you want to have happen when the key releases? Oh, okay, all right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like I was just thinking about what we would maybe do to have the key release. Like, I could see totally like, maybe like changing the color or something like that. I mean, because of the way that this is set up, it's sort of cumulatively adding, you know? So if you like changed it back on the key release or something, you could kind of like easily get into a situation where maybe the key release would undo what we did. But yeah, it just kind of all depends on how you set it up. So other things to think about with regard to interaction. Let's see. The other sort of fun thing that you can do is a little mouse dragged function. So I'm going to just show you quickly a mouse dragged function. And again, it works very similarly to the other functions. We do happen to have now an X and a Y variable in our thing. So if we run this, we can sort of steer with activate it. So we can steer with the keyboard, and then we can use the mouse dragged function to kind of literally like drag it around, and then we can still steer it from whatever whatever position we're at. So yeah, that's a lot of interaction for one day. I think it's important to realize that within these like mouse clicked or mouse dragged and also the Keypressed function, you can activate literally any code you want within that function. So if it's, in this case, we're changing the value of variables, but if you maybe want to draw a bunch of stuff to the screen or activate even maybe a secondary function, those are all things that you could do with these functions. And probably, like, we look at some of the, I'm just going to show you the advanced examples. I'm not going to kind of like really get into them. But just to answer sort of a couple of questions, there's also a slider. And a slider can be kind of awesome because the slider is basically like changing the values of a number based on the input. So in this case, we just are tuning in like a color. But you could also use sliders to change the maybe number of objects drawn on the screen. You could use them to change rotation. You could use them to change even the shape of something if you're enumerating the vertices. There's just like tons and tons of stuff that you can do with these functions. Another sort of really cool thing you can do with interaction that someone asked about today is like how to do a rollover. And so basically here, when we're rolling into this, it goes a certain color, and then when we're rolling into this, it goes into a different color. But it is basically just kind of as I sort of said before, it's a series of if statements to sort of like see if you're inside or outside the circle or the square. So it's a little more complicated, but it just kind of depends on what your threshold is for this stuff and how how you feel comfortable. I think this is a 3D grid that I made a while back that, not quite sure what's happening here, actually. Yes. Here we go. So I wanted to activate the crazy function, crazy part. But it could be something really simple. Like in this case, we're using the keypressed to kind of like change modes within the sketch. And then just using like a simple mouse dragged function to kind of rotate this along more than one axis. So with 3D objects, we haven't spent a lot of time in class talking about 3D objects, but with 3D objects, you, instead of just having a single rotate, you can rotate on the X, Y, or Z axis. So it just gives you like a lot more sort of options. And if you're thinking about possibly working in 3D, there's a really, really sort of simple way that I can give you to sort of get in there. And that is to steal this part of the code. You have to declare WebGL rendering mode to get it into 3D. And then you also have to declare a camera. So, and then with those 2 lines of code, you could be, if you want an extra variable to think about, which is Z, you could be in 3D mode. So that's one of the cooler things that P5 does. So I did want to take at least a second to mention that. Does anyone have any sort of like last or questions? I'm like have 4 minutes to spare. Yeah. Yeah, so sure. So, well, right now our color value is a single channel. So we could change the color value to, let's say, see something else like RGB. So this would be maybe 0, and this would be maybe a variable called B. And so then I'm just going to declare the variable called B up here. And maybe I'll make it 0 to start with, but we'll amp it up to 255. So right now, this B variable is in the blue channel for our color. So if we were down here in one of these key presses, I'm going to go with the up arrow and the down arrow. And I'm going to say B plus equals 10. And I think I'm going to write that into the down arrow too, just so I can get like maximum effect. Yeah, so one thing, and I'm kind of sad that like I don't think we'll have a super lot of time to talk about it, but my personal favorite way of dealing with color in P5 is through HSB Color. So the default is RGB, which is what I just did, where we had like a blue channel, and we were just kind of raising and lowering the level of the blue channel. HSB is awesome because you can actually use a for loop to kind of iterate through the rainbow. So you can iterate through the hue channel. So instead of like with RGB, you literally have 3 colors. You have red, blue, and green. So it's really hard, at least for me as an artist, it's really hard for me to kind of conceptualize what's purple? What's the number of purple without using like a color picker? But with HSB, as you can see here, the entire spectrum is on the hue channel, and you can kind of just like move through it. So if I were to super quickly demonstrate that, I guess I would change our color mode to HSB. And so that gets declared at the beginning. So now this is HSB. So that'll make the first channel here hue, and then the second channel saturation, and then the last channel is brightness. So I might need to do things like just a tiny bit differently. So here it looks like C is the channel that we want to mess with. And so I think here I'm just going to raise and lower the value of C so you can, no pun intended, so you can see. And the reason it's not working right now, I have a very simple explanation for that. It's because right now we have the saturation set at 0 and the brightness also set at 0. So I'm going to set the brightness at 255, and I'm also going to set the saturation at 255. Okay, and so now activate my window. You can see you can iterate through the rainbow. I love me a rainbow. What can I say? I'm a sucker for rainbows. So that seems like a good place to kind of leave it. I'll definitely leave this example with the HSB Color in our examples for the day. And yeah, don't hesitate to contact me over email or whatever. I've been able to troubleshoot a few code problems thus far. But yeah, it's always fun to see what y'all are working on. So have a fantastic weekend. Bye.